I never thought I'd be grateful for installing security cameras around my pool, but those cameras became the undisputed stars in what folks now call the Great Pine Grove Estates Trashgate. My name is Mark Mitchell, and this is the story of how our Homeowners Association president's personal vendetta against my pool makeover spiraled into a petty crime that made our local news and nearly broke our neighborhood. It all kicked off last spring when I decided it was time to revamp my backyard pool. The original, straight out of the 1990s, design was looking tired. After a banner year at my architecture firm, I finally had the cash to give it a proper facelift. Being the rule-following type, I meticulously followed every guideline in our HOA handbook. I submitted detailed plans, material samples, even a fancy 3D rendering to show how little the street view would change. The upgrade was simple: new tiles, some modern safety tweaks, and energy-efficient equipment. Nothing crazy, just a tasteful update. The plans breezed through the initial HOA review meeting, sailed right through with 4 out of 5 votes in favor. The only no came from Karen Wellington, our freshly elected HOA president. Looking back, I should have seen the red flags when she spent a solid 15 minutes arguing that my proposed blue tiles were too Miami for our traditional all-American suburb. But majority rules, right? So I scheduled the work to start the next month. That's when the letters started showing up. First, a notice about my lawn being a 1/4 inch too long. Then, a warning about my mailbox not being reflective enough. When I installed a security doorbell camera, explicitly allowed by HOA rules, mind you, I got a citation for surveillance equipment visible from the street. Each letter was signed with Karen's name, complete with a little smiley face that somehow made it feel even more passive-aggressive. The pool renovation started on schedule, and that's when Karen really kicked things into high gear. She'd park her pearl-white Lexus SUV across the street every morning, snapping photos of the workers, scribbling notes on her tablet. When I finally went over to ask what was up, she gave me this sickly sweet smile and said, "Oh, just documenting all the violations for our monthly meeting, sweetie. Someone has to keep up community standards." I tried to be reasonable, invited her to inspect the work, offered to walk her through the approved plans again, even suggested grabbing a coffee to chat. Her response, "I don't socialize with rule breakers," sets a bad example. This from the same woman who somehow got HOA approval for a giant inflatable unicorn in her front yard. The renovation was almost done when I got an emergency notice from the HOA. According to Karen, an anonymous concerned resident reported that my new pool depth markers were in Arial font, not the traditional Times New Roman specified in Section 7.3.2 of the pool guidelines. The notice demanded I halt all work pending a special review session, which, naturally, couldn't be scheduled for another 6 weeks due to procedural requirements. Okay, I admit it, I lost it a little. I marched straight over to Karen's house, guidelines in hand, ready to point out the complete absence of any font specification. She answered the door in a tennis outfit, white wine glass in hand, even though it wasn't even noon yet. "Oh, Mark," she said, examining her perfect nails. "I was just about to call you. The board's received several more complaints about your little project. I'm afraid we'll have to add those to the review agenda as well." That's when I noticed a copy of the HOA guidelines on her entry table. It looked thicker than mine. When I asked about it, she just smirked and said, "This is the president's copy. It has all the amendments that haven't been formally distributed yet. We have to maintain some executive privileges, don't we?" I left her place fuming, but determined to handle this like an adult. I emailed the entire HOA board, requesting an emergency meeting to address these bogus issues. 3 board members responded sympathetically, clearly clueless about these amendments Karen kept waving around. We scheduled a meeting for the following week, much to Karen's obvious annoyance when she was CC'd on the confirmation email. The night before the meeting, I was burning the midnight oil in my home office when I heard a car pull up outside. Didn't think much of it at first, until I heard voices in my backyard. Flipping over to my security camera feed, I couldn't believe my eyes. There was Karen, in full designer workout gear, directing someone toward my pool area. I grabbed my phone, started recording, and headed downstairs, ready to give her a piece of my mind. But little did I know, karma was about to serve up a dish best enjoyed live and in high definition. Because Karen Wellington was so laser-focused on whatever she was up to, she completely missed three key things. The unmarked police cruiser doing a routine patrol down the street, the fact that she tripped my new security floodlights, and most importantly, well, I'd get to that. The next few minutes were pure chaos. The security floodlights kicked on, and my camera system's auto-record feature went live, capturing everything in crystal clear detail. Karen, with all the authority of a five-star general, was pointing and gesturing, and then I saw it. She started hauling out trash bags. Big, black trash bags, and began throwing them directly into my almost finished pool. Trash, just dumping trash right into the sparkling water. It wasn't cement like some crazy midnight pool-filling scheme. It was trash. In broad daylight. At 3 p.m. "Just dump it all in," she barked, loud enough for the cameras to pick up. "Homeowners Association order. Unsightly pool abatement." I was halfway down the stairs when Officer Miller, from the patrol car, strolled into view. Apparently, he'd noticed the commotion. He walked right up as Karen was hoisting another bag of garbage, ripped open, lettuce and coffee grounds spilling out, and said, "Ma'am, everything all right here?" Karen spun around, startled, that designer athleisure were suddenly looking less intimidating under the floodlights. "Officer, thank goodness you're here." She switched to her sugary sweet voice in a heartbeat. "This pool has been declared a community eyesore by the Homeowners Association. I'm just carrying out an emergency beautification directive." She reached into her fancy jacket and pulled out. It was the same darn HOA meeting agenda she tried to pass off as official before. Officer Miller took the paper, gave it a skeptical look, and said, "Ma'am, this looks like meeting minutes. Not exactly a permit to be dumping trash in someone's pool." That's when I stepped in, phone still recording. "Officer, I'm the homeowner, and I definitely did not authorize this." I held up my phone to show him the live video feed. Karen's face cycled through disbelief, to anger, to a truly spectacular shade of purple. "This is a private HOA matter. You have no jurisdiction here." She actually stomped her foot, which would have been almost funny if she wasn't actively trashing my $75,000 pool renovation. Officer Miller, bless his professional heart, remained calm. "Ma'am, intentionally dumping trash into someone's pool without their permission could be considered vandalism, property damage, and a few other things I'm sure we can discuss downtown. I'm going to need to see some ID." Karen's response? She whipped out her phone and started furiously texting. "This is all a misunderstanding. I'm contacting our HOA attorney right now." Officer Miller just raised an eyebrow. At 3 in the afternoon? On a Tuesday? That's when Mrs. Chun from across the street, who'd lived in Pine Grove longer than anyone, walked over. "Karen," she said, in that quiet, no-nonsense way of hers. "What in the world are you doing?" Other neighbors started peeking out of their houses too, drawn by the lights and raised voices. Karen tried to rally them. "These people are letting their property values drag down the whole neighborhood. I'm just trying to protect our community." But nobody was buying it. Not with her standing there, surrounded by trash bags, security lights glaring, and a police officer looking increasingly unimpressed. Mrs. Chun just shook her head and said, "I remember when the HOA was about community, Karen. not control. By 3:30 p.m., backup officers arrived, along with a detective. They took statements from everyone, me showing them the security footage. Even they struggled to keep straight faces listening to Karen's increasingly outlandish excuses. First, it was emergency pool maintenance, then unauthorized refuse disposal by a rogue contractor. And finally, she claimed I'd asked her to stage a trash incident for insurance purposes. Officer Miller, again, bless him, patiently explained that HOA rules are civil matters, not criminal. But intentionally damaging someone's property? That was a different story as they sorted things out. Karen's phone buzzed nonstop. She kept declining calls from a number labeled Frank, urgent. Didn't think much of it at the time, but that number would become very important later. The officers finished up, advised me to file a restraining order, and told Karen not to come onto my property again. As she stomped back to her Lexus, she yelled, "This isn't over, Mark Mitchell. The HOA board will hear about this tomorrow." What Karen didn't know was, the board would hear about it tomorrow. But not from her. Because while she was busy with the police, I'd been forwarding the security camera footage to every single board member, along with a detailed timeline of her escalating harassment. Even I couldn't have predicted how fast things would unravel for Karen Wellington once the sun came up, or how that mysterious Frank would end up exposing a scheme that went way beyond my little pool. The next morning, I called in sick to work and spent hours meeting with my lawyer, showing her the videos, emails, screenshots of everything Karen had pulled. As we went through the evidence, her expression went from concerned to incredulous to, I swear, slightly gleeful. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, "I don't say this often, but I think you should let me contact the district attorney's office. This goes beyond simple harassment." While my lawyer got to work, I attended an emergency HOA board meeting called by the other members. Karen was conspicuously absent, texting that she had a prior engagement. The other board members were, to put it mildly, horrified by the security footage. And that's when the real revelations started pouring out. Board member Janet Wilson had been quietly digging into some oddities in the HOA finances. She'd discovered Karen had been massively inflating violation fines, diverting the extra funds to a separate, off-the-books account. That mysterious Frank who kept calling Karen? Turns out he was Franklin Morris, a local real estate developer notorious for snapping up distressed HOA communities on the cheap. The scheme was audacious. Karen had been working with Frank to systematically tank our property values through aggressive enforcement and made-up rule changes. Meanwhile, Frank's company was secretly buying up foreclosed homes in our neighborhood. Once they controlled enough properties, they planned to dissolve the HOA and redevelop the whole area into luxury condos. My pool renovation hadn't just annoyed Karen. It had thrown a wrench into their whole operation. A well-maintained property with modern upgrades would raise surrounding values, making their hostile takeover more expensive. That's why she'd become so desperate to stop it. The district attorney's office was very interested, especially since the scheme crossed county lines and involved multiple properties. By that afternoon, Karen was being questioned by investigators. They found spreadsheets on her computer detailing the whole plan, emails with Frank discussing strategy. The cherry on top, she'd used her official HOA email account for everything, making it all admissible evidence. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Karen was arrested and charged with multiple felonies: fraud, conspiracy, property damage. Frank flipped on her in exchange for a lighter sentence. Local news crews set up camp in our neighborhood, interviewing bewildered residents about the HOA corruption scandal. One reporter, bless her heart, dubbed it Trashgate. The most satisfying moment? Karen's arraignment. She showed up in court in designer clothes, flashing that trademark condescending smile, clearly expecting to charm her way out. But when the judge started reading the charges, mentioning the potential 10-year sentence, her smile cracked like cheap paint. Her lawyer immediately started plea-bargaining. In the end, Karen took a plea deal. 2 years in prison, hefty fines, and restitution to all the homeowners she'd fraudulently fined. Plus, she was banned from ever serving on an HOA board again. Frank's company got slammed with fines and forced to sell back the properties they'd acquired. The aftermath actually brought some good to our community. The new HOA board, led by Mrs. Chun, rewrote our bylaws to be fair and transparent. All financial records are now open to residents, and fines need committee approval, not just one person's whim. They even unanimously approved my pool renovation Mediterranean blue tiles, and all.my pool was finally finished last week. To celebrate, I threw a neighborhood pool party. Watching kids splashing in the water, neighbors chatting on the new deck, Mrs. Chun raised her glass in a toast. To Mark, she said, who reminded us that sometimes fighting back is the best way to bring a community together. I couldn't help but grin when someone suggested we put up a little plaque by the pool. The proposed text? This pool survived Trashgate and Karen. And so did we. Last I heard, Karen's not adjusting well to prison life. Apparently, she tried to start an inmate advisory committee to regulate prison uniform colors. Didn't go over big. The guard who told me this said the inmates now call her HOA Karen and unanimously voted down her exercise yard rule changes. As for me, I'm enjoying my beautiful new pool, secure in the knowledge that my security cameras are always recording, just in case any other HOA presidents get any creative ideas about afternoon refuse disposal. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just winning. It's making sure positive change comes from the victory. Though, I have to admit, knowing Karen's designer workout gear has been replaced by an orange jumpsuit does add a certain satisfaction to my morning swims.